Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane Lamaster. We're here for episode number 89 with very special guest, Sean Lawlor. How are you, sir?
Doing well. It's good to be here, Shane. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. This is early in the morning for me for recording a podcast, so I appreciate you. I appreciate you making the time this early. It's not even that early. We're just, I'm a night owl, so 9:30 is a little early to get my brain working, but this is a very welcome sort of wake-up call for my brain and my consciousness, and it's a pleasure always to talk to you and share ideas. So thank you.
Likewise. Yeah, for sure.
Nice. So the first question I always ask is the only standard question that I have for any of my guests. And you've heard the podcast before, so hopefully you saw this coming. I'm not blindsiding you, but that question is, so the podcast is called Conversations with the Mind. And I want to know for you, when I ask you, or when I say that phrase, Conversations with the Mind, what sort of things come up for you in your internal consciousness, whether it be, visualizations or imagery or just ideas about what that phrase means for you specifically and how it sits with you.
Yeah. Been thinking about this a little bit. It's an interesting just phrasing as your title. I was thinking like capital M mind. So like collective mind. So my mind, my personal mind pretty quickly goes to Carl Jung and a collective unconscious, and just kind of thinking along the lines of like a universal mind that we're all sharing in some capacity. And almost like in engaging to like our two personal minds, we can like transcend that in a way and like converse, with one another, like Sean conversing with Shane, but also like getting beyond ourselves through the art of conversation and flow state, as I know you're very interested and well versed in. In terms of images, just kind of got this image of someone meditating and like a closed eyes with like a wide open third eye, just like kind of beaming into some colorful place beyond that person. So I've been doing a lot of like guided, I wouldn't even say guided, just like journeys through imagery in my own mind recently. So I guess that's kind of fresh, just like traveling through the inner images for insights and reflection.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, you certainly have a way with words. I chose the title on purpose, obviously, with intention behind it. But I chose that specific title because I feel like, it has so many different meanings and a different meaning for each and every person, and how they engage with their own mind and the collective mind and what that means. But the more and more, this podcast is a consciousness-based podcast, and it's really about exploring this thing we call consciousness, our own individual consciousness, but also the larger C consciousness and the interplay between the two, and what the hell is happening on this planet in this dimension with that. And the more I dig into consciousness itself, the more I'm actually considering renaming the podcast. I'm not sure if I can technically do that on the platform without like having to start a whole new one. I don't want to do that. I've put a lot of work and a lot of years into this so far, so I have to do a little more research into that. But I've thought of renaming it, instead of Conversations with the Mind, being Conversations with Consciousness. just because, well, right now, and you have a background in philosophy, so this I think is going to be a very interesting conversation for us, and super insightful for me. Right now, in my doctoral studies, I'm taking a class in the philosophy department, taught by the chair of the philosophy department at Colorado State. He's actually going to be on my dissertation committee. He's going to be a committee member. Really cool guy. Hopefully, I have him on the podcast soon. But this philosophy course is it's the metaphysics of the self. And
Whoa, that
yeah,
sounds awesome.
it is phenomenal, dude. I go into class twice a week on campus for this class, and every time I go into class, I feel like, okay, I've got some sense of what is going on, and what this whole consciousness thing and reality is all about, and how they're interwoven. And then each class, my mind is just blown completely apart, and I leave the class being like, I have no idea what's going on, and that's the kind of class I love, right? Because it's constantly pushing me and challenging me to grow and to change my ideas and values. And a couple of weeks ago, I for the last 10 or 15 years since my undergrad, when I was taking Buddhism classes, I felt very strongly, before that I was an atheist, but I felt very strongly that I was a Buddhist, and I've been following like a Buddhist path. And even like my wedding was a Buddhist jujitsu ceremony.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was pretty sweet.
I have no concept of what that looks like, except that it sounds awesome.
Yeah, well, we got married up at the Mishawaka. And my wife and I both wore jujitsu gis. We got married on a jujitsu mat. All of our bridesmaids and groomsmen were all in jujitsu gis. My first MMA coach was our officiant. I got promoted to brown belt. Like, as the ceremony was going on, my wife stopped the ceremony mid-ceremony, and my coach, who was one of my groomsmen, surprised me with a belt promotion. And then my wife, after our first kiss, hip tossed me right in front of the whole crowd. And it was really cool. And, the Buddhist aspects were just that we wanted to remove all of the Western Christian or Catholic undertones that commonly go with marriage, and broaden it out to a greater spiritual foundation. And instead of rings, we exchanged mala beads. We had been wearing each other's mala beads for the entire year prior, from the moment we got engaged. I handed her my beads and she handed me hers, and we charged them up with our positive energy for a year. And then we exchanged them on our wedding day. And so I wear mine every day. And then afterwards, my coach insisted that I strip off my shirt, and everyone in the wedding who wanted to whipped me with jujitsu belts, as is common for a jujitsu promotion. So that was fun. It's like a rite of passage. So that was the wedding. But I wanted to get back to this Buddhist thing. So for 10 or 15 years, I've been practicing Buddhism and felt like I was a Buddhist. And then just a couple weeks ago, in this metaphysics of the self class, I think I found out that I'm not a Buddhist.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was pretty
big.
It was ground shaking, because, I agree with, and I resonate really strongly with most Buddhist concepts, but the idea that, the core of everything is simply empty, and that there's no ultimate consciousness or anything like that just didn't really sit with me. And we started exploring this ancient Indian tradition called the Advaitin school, which has a lot of beliefs in line with Buddhism, but they believe that, in similar to a lot of Hindu beliefs, that there's these multi-layered consciousnesses. We're currently living in what's called jiva consciousness, or embodied consciousness within our body, which is the illusory or the the false self, right? And then above that is the Atman consciousness, which is sort of, it's not necessarily like a being or an entity or anything like that, but it's described as just the mere potentiality of consciousness, that it holds the potentiality of all consciousnesses that can be individuated underneath it. And then there's still another layer above that called the Brahman consciousness, which is sort of the ground construct, or the space in which consciousness can even come about. And I was like, holy shit, like that's a lot more in line with what I intuitively feel about myself, much more than like the Buddhist concept of no self or complete emptiness. I guess I just want to believe that there is higher and higher levels, and that there's a purpose, right? Because if there's no self or everything's empty, my next question is like, well, then what's the purpose of our existence in the first place? So there's got to be something. Um, yeah, so with philosophy and this metaphysics of the self class, I'm doing a lot of talking here, but it's really cool.
Fascinating, man.
Yeah, we start picking apart, the ideas of subject versus object, and can consciousness exist without an object for it to be directed towards? And if there are objects in the world, or thoughts as objects, they must be or they're presented to us through experience, but what and who are they being presented to? So that's the
I'm getting it's like phenomenology.
exactly. So that's like the subject side of it. So consciousness could be this subject that our experience and phenomena are presented to. But every time we try and flip the lens around and try and examine consciousness, it becomes the object of that equation, and therefore the subject piece of self like dissolves and disappears, and it's in this infinite loop of like you can't observe it. The more you try, it just keeps eluding you. So interesting stuff. In my undergrad, I took like philosophy of mind and philosophy of science too, but I'd be interested to hear from my long rant here, and your background in philosophy, like how do you take all that stuff? It's got to be pretty interesting to you too.
Yeah, man. I was just with you every second of that. I have a lot of questions actually from like what everything you said. I just
Yeah,
like so
ask
many
away.
curiosities.
Let's do it. Let's dig in.
um, hmm. Well, I guess I had a question come up at the beginning of that, which I think you touched on, but like maybe just to get out more explicitly, I think that started when you were talking about changing the name of your podcast from Conversations with the Mind, Conversations with Consciousness. So I'm curious what the difference is in your mind between the mind and consciousness.
It's such a good question. And again, when I started this podcast, I thought they were one and the same. I thought the
Yeah.
mind was consciousness, but the more I dig into, writings of other much smarter philosophers before our time, we're finding that they're asking these questions, which end up leading us down pathways that differentiate the two. That consciousness is not the mind. That mind is sort of a subset, or it's a way of experiencing consciousness. It's through the mind, right? Just like it's like a sliver, right? And another sliver is like the body, and we can experience consciousness through the body, through our visual sense. In different traditions, there's like visual consciousness, tactile consciousness, auditory consciousness, mind consciousness, awareness consciousness. What else is there? Yeah, but there's like all these different slivers, and mind is just like one sliver of those things. So and you're a meditator,
Okay.
right? And so in
Yeah.
meditation, when we get skilled enough, we can turn off the monkey mind, we can turn off the chatter in our mind, but
Okay.
there's still consciousness there, right? There's still like a base awareness that's aware of itself being aware. Um, and so mind is not like a necessary component for consciousness to exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
like consciousness like mediated through the mind, or like it's one of the channels of like flow of consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like I'm thinking more and more of the mind as like a tool, rather than like a base state. Um, but it's like a tool, just like our body, right? We can go to the gym and we can lift and we can make our body, we can sharpen that tool to work for us, and we can do the same thing with the mind. We can, and that's what I do in my private practice, is really help people optimize their mind and sharpen it, as a tool so that they can use it. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
considering changing my podcast because I think conversations with the mind might be too limited in scope when
Mm.
really I'm trying to get at the bigger question of consciousness.
It's like the mind is pretty specifically like mental content, like cognitive content, whereas consciousness can like filter into things that don't have mental content necessarily. Like I'm kind of thinking of, you hear like plants have a kind of consciousness, and like I don't think they think in the ways that we do. I mean, we can't find like a brain in there, but like the consciousness of um, growing towards the sun, something like this patterned way. I don't feel like expert enough to really be able to like talk about that, but yeah, just this manifestation of larger consciousness without the mediation of a mind.
Yeah, I think the human mind is really unique in its capacities. We have the ability for self-reflection and reflexivity, and um, consciously and intentionally changing our ways of thinking and our ways of behaving and acting on the world. Um, and who we don't know because we're not trees. They would be the experts, and maybe we could get on some ayahuasca or something and ask them.
That's what came to my mind. It's like, in fact, I got a little taste of that one particular experience
Yeah,
on
for sure.
ayahuasca.
Yeah, tell me
Yeah.
about that.
Um, well, I did it in the States, but it was this group from Colombia that came up to bring the medicine. They'd come up like 3 times a year or so to the US and do, I think, 3 retreats every time they come. And I went with a girlfriend at the time, and I had never had a bad trip. So, I'd taken mushrooms and LSD, and well, I guess I had a freaky experience on salvia, but that felt a little different. But I kind of went in, it's like, oh yeah, everyone's making this big deal on ayahuasca. Like, I think I'm ready. Like, I don't have bad experiences, and I just got destroyed, like absolutely wrecked. Like the first drink, not so much happened. I was just kind of sitting there meditating, saw some colors. It felt really like pleasant, and it was just super mild. And so I was kind of sitting there thinking like, okay, this is nice, but like people making a big deal out of this thing that's not that big of a deal. So I went for the next drink, and like by the time I was back at my mat, there was like these colorful tendrils just like forming out of the air. I was just like, oh, damn. Like I could feel something basically inciting in my body that I hadn't felt before. And I just had this instantaneous sense like, okay, you're about to experience this. And within a few minutes, it was like I felt terror coming on, because what I was seeing and experiencing in my body was way, way, way more intense than anything I had ever experienced on psychedelic or in general. And it's kind of like, okay, just breathe. Like you got your breath. It's all good. You're gonna be fine. And then all of a sudden, like everyone just started puking, and just like all these horrible, like horrible sounds around. And this woman started screaming, and she ran outside screaming, and her cries were just like echoing into the night. And all of a sudden, it was met by the howling of all these coyotes in the woods. So there's just like this cacophony of screams and coyotes screaming. And I looked around. I was like, is this for real? Like, am I experiencing this? Am I making this up? And it became clear that it was happening. But yeah, just the boundary between uh, anything was gone. And I totally got terrified, and it was like getting thrown into a different dimension of consciousness, and not, I mean, not being ready, but also getting really important lessons. And I think a lot of those lessons were around ego,
Mm.
and like the way that I came to it, in this sense of like, oh yeah, yeah, I'm good. Like I'll be fine. I'm a psychonaut, blah, 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 whatever. Like I had to get my ass kicked, and I did. And I was really afraid, and I really experienced fear. And there was like, it was a fear of just losing complete control, and like being unwilling to like loosen my grip on what I knew, quote, knew was true. And then all of a sudden, just having that forced away and feeling sick and awful and scared. But when I finally like found the strength to stand up and go to there's like a bucket for people to purge into. Um, One of the facilitators, I like signaled him, and he came over and helped me. And he was just like this deeply embodied person who was just so physically grounded and just like exuding this like energy of strength. And I just remember like gripping his shoulder, and it just like anchored me in this place. And it's just through that process, and then like of surrendering to like just letting myself heave and purge, there was a releasing that happened. And like there was still fear, but the whole experience transformed into like, it felt kind of like a rite of passage in a way. Like I was able to move, or invited into a different um uh I don't even know, just a different level of consciousness, or being, or just initiated into this dimension of consciousness that felt like the consciousness of like the jungle. It felt really
Mm.
organic and plant like. And even though I wasn't in the Amazon, like it still felt like it was there. And yeah, just like the realities of the dark side of that, like the underbelly of the earth. And like I was just having these visions of like, maggots and just these really gross looking things that are real. They're there, but like I'd rather not look at them typically, and just kind of cut them off from my mind. But then all of a sudden, like here they are. Like, what were you afraid of? It's kind of this experience. So yeah, it felt like a consciousness of something organic. And I mean, something I can never explain in words, but like of the earth, the jungle, a spirit, like, or a whole host of spirits, not just one spirit. Is part of something way, way, way bigger than me
Mhm.
and anyone in that room, the experience.
So was
Yeah.
it kind of like Gaia consciousness, or like the consciousness of Earth as a system of organisms that are all independent but still part of this much larger system? You said there was like a plant
Yeah.
feeling to it, and we
Yeah.
started this story. I was wondering like if you had gotten a sense from your experience of like what it was like to be a plant, or to be a tree, or to be that sort of living being with its own form of consciousness through your experience.
Hmm. That's a really interesting question. Yeah. Yeah, I think so, because I basically, all notions of like I and my identity were completely, I mean, not just gone, like ridiculed in a way. Like it just made a mockery of. And I was just organic matter. I was just these this physical matter that's gonna decay as well. Sorry if there's background noise. It sounds like someone's like doing something outside. Should pass soon.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, yeah, so I think I did get that experienced and it was hard to surrender into. But yeah, that Gaia consciousness resonates. I think animism is this idea that like each being, each thing has its own spirit, like its own independent spirit. I kind of get mixed up sometimes between animism and pantheism.
Yeah, or maybe panpsychism.
Panpsychism, I don't think I know that one.
Yeah, panpsychism is similar, that they espouse that every piece of matter has its own form of consciousness. And
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
not 100% sure if they think that inanimate objects like rocks and things like that have consciousness, but sometimes I've definitely thought about this, and sometimes I'm inclined to believe that every bit of matter has some form of consciousness, whether we could measure it or not. So, like a rock, definitely the mountain, right, that we live right next to, I think has its own living consciousness as a living, moving, regenerating, creationary being. I can feel that when I go up to the mountain and meditate and connect with it. Like I can feel a spirit to the whole thing.
Hmm.
But some belief systems believe that every single atom or particle in this universe has in itself like a holographic piece of that giant C consciousness as part of it. Just in its mere existence, it sort of presupposes that it has a connection to or some aspect of that larger consciousness.
It make me think of quantum physics
Yeah,
a little
totally.
bit. You get to that subatomic level, and it's just like movement, unpredictable motion, and space
Mhm.
between these subatomic particles, even in something that looks completely static, like this mug I'm holding. That there's a flurry of unpredictable activity that depends on like it's shifted when I look at it.
Mhm.
Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I totally feel what you mean. Um, you use the word spirit. Do you use that like interchangeably with consciousness, or is that something different?
That's a tough question and hard to put my finger on. I think I probably use it interchangeably um, by mistake. If I were to really think about it, I would probably say that they're different. Um, the way that I'm conceptualizing consciousness these days is sort of like it's not an entity, it's not an object per se, but it's more like a stream or a flow of potentiality. So consciousness is like this stream of infinite potential um, that manifests itself in various forms and shapes and meanings and thoughts and ideas, um, largely due to like quantum laws, right? So quantum science has shown us the observer effect, where, like you said, like all the particles are always moving around us in what seems like chaos, but is probably more ordered than we think it is. And then as soon as we observe or turn our attention towards something, then all of a sudden those particles instantaneously form into like an object, or if we turn our attention towards a mind concept or whatever, it forms into a thought, so that it can be further observed. Um, but then as soon as we look away, those particles are back to infinite potentiality and moving around, and we don't really know, because we can't observe those particles in a state of non-observance. We can't like turn away and see what's going on with them when we're not looking at them, but we know what happens to them when we look at them, that they form into this shape. So I think of consciousness more as like this infinite field of potentiality just waiting to be manifested, by intentional awareness, or focused attention towards something. Whereas spirit has more of like a feeling to me as like a form of entity, not necessarily like a physical entity, like most people think of it, but almost like a transparent, translucent presence that has intelligence of some sort, but it's sort of maybe it's interwoven with consciousness in a way that the spirit of things helps to create the form, or helps to create the forms, or that we see, or that we can perceive. Maybe it's the boundary line or something that holds the space, or holds the container of the things that we see. But it definitely seems like it has intentionality behind it. Spirit has intentionality, whereas consciousness doesn't have any intentionality per se. It's just the pure potential of anything. And then when we direct our intentionality towards it, it sort of manifests in a way that we can make meaning of it through symbols or language or ideas or thoughts. So I guess that's how I'm parsing out the two. But I'm not an expert.
Impressive. Yeah. 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 I don't know if I could even try to parse out those two. I think I kind of use them interchangeably, but that was cool to follow you through that. One thing that was interesting when you were talking about quantum physics and the observer effect, and you mentioned that also in terms of like mind concepts.
Mm.
I'd never really thought of that. I just thought of it like in terms of physical concepts, but it would make sense that that trend would be the same with mental concepts. And it just kind of makes me think of like how people get stuck in particular ways of perceiving, like by focusing on a concept so intently that it becomes dense, and like so dense that there's no other concept to see around that. And just how like a fluidity of mind and perception can, I think, allow us to view from more perspectives simultaneously, so everything doesn't just condense around um, one thing.
Yeah, it's like what you focus on solidifies, or what you focus on grows, right? So
Yeah.
like if you're stuck in a depressive state, well, pay attention to the types of thoughts you're thinking. Are you thinking mostly negative, depressing thoughts? And if you are, the collective accumulation of those things sort of solidifies into this state which you call depression, and then you feel it, right? But I think the same thing is possible for states of joy. If you focus intently on joyful thoughts and joyful feelings, I think that can solidify and become your reality. um, but yeah, like in meditation, I mean, you'll notice, like, as you try to systematically shut down, or disconnect your sense of self from the content of your mind, and just let it run the way it runs, you'll notice that there's like thousands and millions of thoughts and ideas and concepts, like, going in and out all the time.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you find one that like sparks your interest and you turn your attention to it, then that thought becomes much louder than the rest of the chatter and the noise running through your mind, and it solidifies, like you said. And then we got to practice again and come back to the breath, and kind of let go of our connection or attachment to that one thought, and just pay attention to all these things going on in our mind all the time. I think that's the nature of mind, is just constantly providing us with potential directions to follow, that we're sort of extrapolating from this larger stream of consciousness.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just when the self, or when we take one of those concepts or ideas and um, lose the distinguishing points between that and who we are. Like we wrap up our identities within this idea or this concept or this descriptor, something, then we like filter out all those thousands, millions of other potential ideas that don't fit that concept. And then as they come in, they become threatening because it's like, no, I'm not that. I'm this. I know I'm this. And so I can like think of my ayahuasca experience
Mm.
or several other psychedelic experiences in that way of like, it's this unconscious thing. Like, I think I was pretty open minded, but still I was like very attached to certain ideas of like who I am. Even like I'm this person, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm a person. Like even that got completely destroyed. So yeah, just to be able to like hold our concepts of identity lightly, I think is um, a really really helpful way of like loosening the ego structures
Mm-hmm.
a little bit, which makes me think of the neuroscience research in Imperial College London with psilocybin and like the default mode network, and how this high dose psilocybin experiences like um, not deactivates but like really lessens the activity in the default mode network, where they've like mapped our sense of self, like our self concept.
Small
So
S. Yeah.
small s, yes, yeah, totally. That small s large s distinction. Yeah, it would be like movement from small s, like ego self, like I am these things, I know these things, and they've correlated like heightened default mode network activity to like depression and anxiety. And so like lessening that and moving more into, call it like this entropic state of consciousness that's maybe more like capital S
Mm-hmm.
self, like wow, I'm not just these ideas that I have, some of which I created, some of which were given to me. There's there's this field of potentiality like you're talking about. And I hear you saying a lot about like intention and like where we choose to focus,
Mm-hmm.
and like how that shift um, energizes things, like energizes motions, concepts. So yeah, amidst all this, I never seems like give up my, I don't know if it's an attachment or just like a belief in some degree of freedom,
Mm.
like that we do have some freedom of the will of where to look,
Yeah.
where to direct our intention.
Yeah. I feel like we always have a choice. It's only up to us to realize that we have that choice and then take action with it. Um, this idea of ego is not a new thing necessarily, although in the West, it's primarily been talked about since like Freud and psychologists like that who put their own terminology to it. But I'm learning so much in this class, and like I spoke about before, ancient Indian traditions talk about the ego structure as this jiva self, Jiva, and it's a very real piece of consciousness. It's real in the fact that we experience it, in our reality, but it's also an illusion in that we block ourselves by focusing so much on this ego self, that we block ourselves from that large S, and we focus so much on the small s of self. And Buddhists would say something very similar, that this everyday 3D human reality that we think is real is simply an illusion, that we need to work really hard to try and escape from that illusion. Neuroscience with their default mode network, speaking about the same thing, the default mode network being um, our conditioning, or our conditioning into ego, and into small self, in order to get along in the world. And Buddhists would say, by focusing on that small s self, that is the cause of all your suffering, right? If you think about everything in your life that is causing you suffering, it all comes down to that you're devoting too much energy and attention to this illusory self, or this false self. You're attached to it. And I love the idea of being able to. At first I was like, well, screw the ego self, I want to just get rid of it and just live in the higher big S self.
Yeah.
But the more I look into it, you can't destroy that ego. You can't destroy that small s, because it's a part of the large S. You can't, just like you can't destroy or create um, matter in the universe. It just is recycled, right? You can't do that with aspects of yourself. You have to learn to accept ego, love ego, not indulge in ego, but still, give it the attention that it deserves, and also not let it control your life entirely, right? So there's this fine balance between having a greater understanding of large S and what that means, and detaching yourself from the ego in a healthy way. But you also got to live in this world, right? You also
Right.
got to, you
Yeah, it's
also have to,
functional.
yeah, exactly. So it does have functional purpose, and there's a reason for it to be here and be with us, and be in our conscious experience. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. So we have to find a way to use ego in a constructive way, a way that hopefully is more focused on like bettering the planet or bettering ourselves or helping others, rather than trying to bolster the ego, or get one over on other people or something like that. That's like too attached to it. And you were talking about in your ayahuasca experience, um, this instance where you felt like this tension, right? Because you're holding on to like, no, this is who I am. Like, I don't want to let go. And then
Yeah.
the purging experience itself, um, I've experienced that too in ceremony, where I feel nausea come up and I feel like, oh shit, I gotta puke, and I'm trying to hold it in. I'm trying not to puke. And that is just me trying to hold on to that ego, trying to hold on to that control, right?
Mm.
But then as soon as you allow the purging to happen and you just give into it, and you just "Ugh,"
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
hardcore, like
Yeah.
that is that action, or that initiation into that letting go completely.
Mm.
Um, you let go of complete control of your body in that moment and just let that stuff flow out.
Yeah.
Then immediately afterwards, like you said in your experience, like this whole new dimension opened up to you, and the fear was still there, but it was transformed.
Yeah. Something shifts. Yeah. So you're talking about ayahuasca specifically, like you've said in
Yeah,
ceremony?
yeah, and I mean, I've sat in peyote circles too with the Native American church,
Yeah.
and noticed similar things too, where I'm like really trying to hold in the nauseous feeling, because I don't want to purge, I don't want to throw up, it feels so uncomfortable, or um, I'm going to be so embarrassed, or others are going to judge me because of it, or they're going to hear me puking,
Mm.
and it's just
Yeah,
so
I get those too.
yeah. And then it's, but look, I mean, if you look at the structure of those thoughts, like, I don't want to throw up, I don't want others to judge me, right? It's all focused on
Yeah.
that ego self, right?
Right.
You're
Totally.
so worried about others judging Shane or Sean, this human entity. Like, none of that
Hmm.
shit matters.
No, no, not at all. I'm so worried about like how I'm being perceived
Yeah,
by these like 30 strangers who I'll probably never see again.
right.
Is such a trend like that is manifest in so many different facets of life. Like this worry of how I'm being perceived, that's just not helpful. Like, well, there's something helpful about it. I mean, if I abandon it completely, like you can get in trouble. But it just becomes a prison at some point, and that's been like one of the prisons that I've had to like find my way out of, because I got those I don't know, introjects or stories about like, basically who I am is dependent on how other people see me. That was kind of the ethos that I was like raised in.
Mm.
So, I mean, I was just like, um, really, I think until I was like 20 years old, like just didn't have any original thoughts. Like I was just completely wrapped up in like a constant like underlying tension of how I was being perceived. And it's just been it's been a harsh at times unraveling process. Um, but like it manifests in an ayahuasca ceremony in that way. Like it's the overemphasis on something that I cannot control ends up like feeding and creating some kind of persona or this way of trying to be in the world that meets these illusory expectations that are impossible to be met, which has like the net effect of like never being enough or never acting right or never whatever it might be. So to flip that script and like release some of those attachments, and it's not like I did ayahuasca and purged a couple times and now I'm free from like worrying about that shit. Like it still comes up, um, but it helps. It has helped, and um, I can catch those a little better now. Like when I'm feeling that tension in my body and worrying about things that just aren't a helpful use of energy.
Mm.
But
So,
at the same time, it's not just a cognitive shift either, I'm realizing.
so I have a question for you, and I'm purely curious about this, but I think it would also be, extremely helpful for a lot of listeners out there who are, we're always currently in the midst of hopefully trying to better ourselves, and definitely the listeners of this podcast, they wouldn't be listening if they weren't in that process of self discovery and self actualization. So my question for you is, you we've been talking about how important it is to um, disconnect from those ego structures, just to kind of save yourself the suffering that comes with attachment to them. And that's all good and well. But I want to ask you, like, how do you personally do that? It's a process. Obviously, plant medicine work and other medicine work is part of that process. But on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, how do you go about, I guess, recognizing those programs, those maladaptive programs when they are functioning? How do you recognize them? How do you change them in the moment? How do you reflect on them? Like, how do you go about doing it?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Shane. That's a really good question. Two things come to mind. Um, One's probably the cliche answer of meditation and mindfulness, but the way I've been practicing that recently has been really informed by do you know internal family systems?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess for real quick for listeners who may not be as familiar with it, it's like a, a newer school or model of psychology and counseling that understands the psyche as an interrelated, a system of interrelated parts that are in relationship with one another. And basically, just like we have individual people living inside of our minds and our bodies who can like kind of take over at different times, and they fall under a few specific categories. So I won't like extrapolate it and like all the detail now, and I'm definitely still learning, but basically this model is giving me a way of recognizing things that are happening inside of me, and being able to understand it in terms of like a category. So it's just kind of gives like a better map or a helpful map of the inner territory. So like one of the categories is called firefighters. It's like these are the parts of ourselves that like when something that we pushed away called an exile. So some part of ourself that wasn't accepted that we had to lock away in a room because it's not allowed to be here. There's too much pain. Well, when that starts to rise into consciousness, these firefighter parts take over to just do whatever they possibly can to avoid the catastrophe of this exile coming out. So maybe it will be to, go to whatever your addiction might be, like I don't drink a bunch or something, or just smoke a bunch, like whatever it might be, addiction, or just this really reactive, impulsive behavior. So I'm starting to recognize, like, um, when a really intense internal response comes up and I'm like, oh, I want to go like smoke some weed right now, or like I really need to go have a beer or something. It's like, okay, well, what's happening here? This feels definitely like some kind of firefighter thing going on. And for some reason, that model just is like giving me this way to be with that process and understand it a little more and be like, okay, this isn't like a problem that I have to get rid of. This is an evolutionary response to something that's been really hard to like live with and integrate. And there's a wisdom in it. And maybe it got distorted at some point. But yeah, so basically that's just kind of like a roundabout way of how I've been meditating lately, which I don't know if I can even call it meditation anymore, but like it's, just being quiet and going inward and dialoguing and having conversations with like these parts of my mind,
Mhm.
these parts of myself, like having conversations internally. So I guess that gives me a way of like because your original question was kind of around like how do I disentangle from like the ego concepts.
Yeah, like the pieces of yourself, that we become attached to that cause suffering in your day to day.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of understanding it in that framework rather than like, oh, I am this, like this response is me.
Mm.
Just like, okay, well, this response is happening, it's here, but like IFS, internal family system, has that concept of the capital S self, which is like the seat of consciousness that we all have that's enduring and immutable. And so it's it's like a place to connect to at all times, to engage with these other parts that are not me at my essence.
Mhm.
They're responses and yeah, these sub personalities or whatever. And then the other way that came to mind is writing, and specifically writing fiction, because basically characters in a story I kind of engage with as parts myself. And so if I like, I'll just give an example. I've recently started writing this short story because I noticed that inside myself I have these two parts that are in a lot of conflict. One of them is what I would call like a needy part, and like I'm finding this is coming up in relationship, in this a new relationship I'm in. This like, I want to like be around you more and I want more affection, like this neediness, and there's so much judgment around that, so much judgment. And so like this really intense inner critic comes in when that neediness comes up, and it's just like, get the f out of here, like this is weakness, like you're not allowed to be here. And so I like named these two parts, and so like the needy part I just gave the name of Ned to, and this
Nice.
inner critic I gave the name of Dennis to. And so I started writing the short story where this two roommates named Ned and Dennis that really don't get along live in this place together, and just kind of started like following images of like personifying these parts and writing out their conflict in a fictionalized setting. And that just kind of gives this way of like externalizing an inner process and engaging it from a slight place of removal of being the narrator of this, which I think could be like a gateway into connecting with that capital S self. Um, and then I just get to kind of follow the process instead of just being so caught in it, and like observe it a little more and get curious about it. So that's a fun way to do that too.
I love that so much, because you take your passion for writing and you turn it into like a two-sided benefit for yourself. One benefit is that writing this thing out is a therapeutic process for you as you're doing it. Like you're in a process of self-discovery, and you're working through like these inner conflicts and things like that. And then the second benefit is that you're actually producing like a piece of artwork with your therapeutic process that you can share with other people who can also connect on that level. And like you're healing yourself through the writing, but then when you put your writing out there for others, the healing process that you just went through is rippling out and helping to heal other people in their process. So I just love that. And I definitely want to get to talking about your writing here in a sec. Um, because that's how we were mostly introduced
Yeah.
through your writing. But I wanted to go back to this internal family systems thing real quick. And I love like putting metaphors and images to things to help describe them in ways that might be more digestible to some people in the audience. And in my studies of internal family systems, I never heard authors talk about it in this way, but this is sort of like how I picture it in my mind, is that so it's almost like, have you ever seen the movie uh what is it, not Happy, geez, I'm forgetting the name of the movie. It's an animated movie where there's all these different characters that live in this person's brain. And
Oh yeah, yeah. Inside Out.
yeah, one is like a happy, one is like a grumpy,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I
Angry.
love using animation animated movies. They're so
Totally.
insightful. But in my own visualization, I picture like inside my skull there being like this circular boardroom table, that you would find in like a corporate boardroom. And there's maybe like 15 different seats around the table. One seat is little s self Shane, which is the ego. Then there's like angry Shane, then there's happy Shane, then there's aloof Shane, then there's all these different like characters, right? The firefighter Shane, um, scapegoat, the one that they always blame for their problems,
Totally.
the
Yeah.
exile. The exile is forced under the table. He's not even allowed to sit there, right? But
Oh
then
yeah.
this concept of big S in internal family systems, like your true higher self, is sort of like the executive of the board, and he sits, and it's still a circular table. So every aspect of self inside of my mind and around this table has an equal value at the table. They're all valued. And that's why it's a circular table, like the round table of King Arthur. Everyone has a say, but it also needs to be balanced, right? It's a perfect circle, so it needs to be balanced. It's not like an oblong circle where certain people at the ends of the table have more say than others, but it needs to be balanced in that they're all important. They all need to have a say, but the executive, the big S, has the final say. So, if angry Shane at the table stands up and starts banging his hands on the table, making a ruckus, and then firefighter Shane jumps in and starts like trying to put out the fire, big S, the executive, can be like, whoa, all you guys need to sit down and we need to do this together, right? So for me, using that internal family system model, I try and I seek to find that balance between the different versions of self. And you can't destroy any of those, right? That seat has to
Right.
be filled. If you attempt to destroy a piece of that round table, it's going to be filled, right? There's no vacuum that can exist there, and I don't want to see what's going to come to the table if I let go of a piece of myself. So I just wanted to mention that about like how I visualize it, and maybe that's helpful to somebody out there who's listening. um
Yeah. It's helpful to me.
oh, good.
Yeah, yeah. I love that round idea because I've had that table image come to mind too, but I never thought of it in a round way. It was always rectangular, but I love that idea of like everyone's equidistant from the person across from them. There's like this equality to the structure. And I also love that you connected it to like King Arthur and like
Mhm.
the Knights of the Round Table. And like I just love when we put our personal experiences and like find these like mythological
Mhm.
connections. It's like, oh yeah, this is archetypal. Like
Mhm.
this connects us.
Well, yeah, and you know me well enough by now to know that I am a warrior through and through.
Yeah.
In my external life, I try and be a warrior through my martial arts. I try and be a warrior for, social justice issues and, drug policy advocacy and all these things in the external world. But internally, like almost all my archetypes and the way that I think of myself are in this context of warrior cultures. It's just been my mode of reference for the longest time. And I hope to share with you a little bit of my own hero's journey and my Jungian with my therapist in a little bit. But
Yeah, yeah,
when
absolutely.
we get to talking about our CAP trainings. But I want to first get back to writing and talk to you about your writing, because I think how I came to know you, I believe I first saw you at our very first meeting of the Denver psilocybin panel, when we were actually meeting in person in Denver. Um, and I saw you and this other woman who was with you, and you guys came to the first meeting. And I didn't meet you there, but I saw you. And then later that day, I saw you again in a totally different city in Fort Collins, Colorado.
That's right.
And we were both attending the NOAC psychedelic professionals meeting. And I was like, I just saw you and now you're here again. This must mean something that I'm seeing you twice in one day, this person that I've never met. And then we ended up connecting, and, we talked, and you ended up like interviewing me and writing this piece about me and flow states and psychedelics and things like that. And then we became more and more enmeshed in each other's lives, and our paths have overlapped more and more, which I love, and I'm more and more excited the more things we get to do together. We've shared some really cool conversations and experiences up in the mountains, under the stars, around campfires, um, and really deepened our connection. And so I want to get back to the writing piece, because that's sort of how we first really connected, and how I think that was how our first at least hour-long conversation was centered around your writing. And can you just speak a little bit about like how you got into writing, what you're currently doing with your writing? um, you've already talked about your fictional writing and how that is a personal process for you, but how else do you use writing in your life?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, one detail of that day that you were talking about when we met that I wanted to add, which is connected to this question, was I had that basically a reciprocal experience. Like, who's this dude? Like, I had this desire to strike up a conversation with you, and at the NOAC meeting, they had this icebreaker question of like, who, anyone living or dead, would you want to take psychedelics with? And like very quickly to my mind, I'm like, Hunter S. Thompson. And it came to you before it came to me. And you were like, I would trip with Dr. Hunter S. Thompson.
Yep.
I was like, damn, like really got to talk to this guy. And we got the same person. So Hunter S. Thompson was somewhere at the meeting point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Mm.
that kind of, I mean, when I was first getting into writing about a decade ago, um, it was actually parallel with when I first got into psychedelics and when I first started traveling. They just kind of all go hand in hand. But I came upon people like Hunter S. Thompson and the Beats, like Kerouac and Ginsberg and Neil Cassidy and Kesey, and just um, somehow all of that like dovetailed into like a newfound interest in uh, fiction, and um, fiction as this process of expression and engagement with the self and meaning making and communication. And yeah, I just kind of got obsessed with it. And this was like the end of my college career. So I had been studying philosophy and just decided to pick up an English minor my senior year. And I ended up taking a screenwriting course. And over the course of the semester, we produced like an 80-page screenplay. And I just found like that writing creatively just stimulated my spirit in a way that essay writing, which I still enjoyed, didn't. And I just kind of haven't stopped doing it ever since. And but yeah, that's one way that I engage with it, is through like creating stories. But like then there's this other realm of journalism or interviews, or pretty much all related to psychedelics at this point. And that's kind of become this way to like learn more
Mm.
and just learn more about topics I don't know anything about, like finding these like lips that pop up that sound so fascinating, and then being really lucky to be in Boulder and Fort Collins and Denver, where tons of people are into this stuff and practicing it. And then basically just getting to interview people like you and people like Scott Shannon, and just a whole bunch of people around here who are really deep into fascinating topics like flow state for you. Like I had just kind of become aware of that, and you were talking about it, I think, in our first conversation. It's like, oh, perfect. Like I can get to know Shane better. I can get to know this concept better and write a piece about it. Um, so yeah, that's really been my entry into this whole psychedelic professional world, is like following this trail of breadcrumbs. Like, okay, I'm going into this topic, and then I learn about this bigger topic. I'm going into this by interviewing this person and meeting this person. Um, and ultimately led me to pursuing my second master's, which I'm doing now at Naropa, to become a psychedelic therapist, which I never would have done had I not started interviewing people and writing these articles. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what that is, I suppose. Right now, I'm starting a new piece for Psychedelics Today about group psychedelic therapy, which we've started to, I've started to connect about a little bit, and um, I'm fascinated to learn more about that, and the few people who are practicing that and what that could look like. And then I still do some like reflective writing that's just, pausing, kind of meditating, looking at what's present for me, processing the day or processing important things, just stream of consciousness kind of stuff that doesn't have any intent other than to just like be there with the movement of the pen. I always write by hand. So there's like something ritualistic
Mm.
about just like opening the journal and using the pen and like having the physical process of it without screens.
Yeah, it's almost like turning your writing practice into a ceremony, by doing that and engaging that ritualistic pen to paper. I mean, it's literally like connecting you physically to the word and to the paper. You named all these wonderful authors when you first got into it, and I love almost all of them. I'm not the biggest fan of like the beat authors, although I've read some of them. It's a little dry
Yeah.
for my taste, but I love Ken Kesey. Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test was like one of my favorite books when I first started down this path. Hunter S.
Nice.
Thompson is by far one of my top three authors that I like, or journalists that I like to read from. And his Gonzo style is just so different and amazing than any other writer. Have you ever like tried to emulate his style and try and write in the Gonzo style?
I have, yeah, yeah. So when I first started writing this psychedelic related stuff, it was all for the Rooster magazine
Mhm.
out of Boulder. And actually, I think I wrote an article under a pseudonym um, for them, which was very Hunter inspired, because I took some LSD and went to a gun show.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, yeah, and just wrote about my experience there. So it was very like narrative, like, Gonzo's like, he's in the story. It's not just what's happening externally, it's an interaction, this wild interaction. So yeah, I was like really trying to work to like tap into the spirit of Hunter there while not just totally mimicking as well, like bringing my own personal crap into it. But it was a blast, man. And that was the only thing I ever wrote for them that they published in one of their like physical magazines. All other stuff's online. So apparently it kind of struck a nerve with their readers.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
I
awesome.
love doing that, man. I'd love to do it more, actually. It's really fun.
Yeah, I would love to experiment with that too. Right now, unfortunately, and fortunately, I'm steeped in academic writing, and you know what that's all about. In
Yeah.
philosophy as a major, all you're doing is reading and writing. So yeah, there's very different rules of engagement. When you're doing academic writing, you can't say certain things. You can't express your opinion necessarily unless you're backing it up with research or citing someone else who also shares your opinion, who's of actual relevance, because as students, you're not really seen as relevant in the academic published world until afterwards. So very different
Yeah.
rules. But someday I hope to be able to experiment a little bit more. I have dreams and aspirations of publishing books, after my PhD, really because I'm just fascinated by the written word for two reasons. One is just how, it's almost like a negative. It's like how limiting language is and how limiting words are for expressing, especially states of consciousness and altered states of consciousness that are really ephemeral. Like you can't nail it down. You can't really describe it with words. And anytime you try to, you just put a little bit of it in a box, and it doesn't fully explain it. So one of my interests is like, how can I better use language to explain the unexplainable? But also, I really love how, and your writing is particularly good at this, how to use writing as an actual expression of consciousness for meaning making, like you said, like not only meaning making for myself, but like how can my writing influence the consciousness of others so that they themselves can make greater meaning out of their own life and experience. So I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by those, and I hope to explore those sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think I have kind of an underlying philosophy that, like, if I engage in that process as I write, that it kind of opens that potential for the reader as well to so that's part of it as well. Yeah, the hope that it can offer something to whoever ends up reading it to like think about themselves in a different way, or think about basically just engage in their own internal process as
Mm.
facilitated through this external thing. Do you do any of that writing now, or are you just like, I mean, if you're in a PhD program, like I'm sure you've got, you're kind of maxed out with how much
Yeah.
writing you have to do for that.
Yeah, it's pretty much all academic writing now. Which this is kind of a good segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is our individual experiences through ketamine assisted psychotherapy training, and
Yeah.
that actually being part of a larger process for me, not only for my dissertation studies, which is focused on ketamine assisted psychotherapy and the mystical state experience, but
Oh, sweet.
but I've been working really hard for the last couple years on this personal process, related to my default mode network, and my programming. In that, I grew up with a single mom who was, married a number of times, but I never really connected with any of the stepfathers. Never really had a father figure. Always sought that in my life, and then my little brother was there with us, so we were like this trio. And because of some of the ways my mom treated my brother and I, and the way that I interacted with my mom, um, I found myself in my adult life being still really bound up in and not individuated from my ideas of her, right? So I found myself especially during my addictive years, with alcohol and some other harder drugs. Um, most of my inner dialogue and those conversations I was having with myself were, I mean, they were in my voice. They sounded like me saying them, but the more I looked at them, they weren't me saying those things. It was a memory of my mom telling me those things about myself, like you're never going to be good enough, or why even try, or I don't believe that you can ever do that, or whatever. And I had internalized those, and they had become part of me, and then I misidentified them as like, oh, this is my voice telling me this, when really
Yeah.
it was just me staying attached to that memory of my mom and how she treated me. So this pattern like followed me in my psyche up until very recently. And for the last couple of years, I've been working with a Jungian therapist for my own personal process and my own therapy. And we've been working within the model of the hero's journey, and I'm sure you're very familiar with that. It's this monomyth that most, if not all, stories that are told sort of follow in some way or another. Most movies all follow this same sort of mythological structure, and so my therapist and I, we've been working through this process of, so the intention going in is like this individuation from this memory that I hold of my mom. That's really like, it's locking up and trapping this like libido energy inside of me that, it's draining energy and resources from this internal fire, this internal source that I have, just to pay attention to like these aspects, these memories that I have of my mom. And so this process of an individuation, my intention behind it was like, I need to become my own independent person. I need to detach or disentangle myself from these memory formations and these thoughts that were implanted by my mom. And I need to reclaim this libidinal fire energy for myself, so that I can like pour it out into my passions and what I love, and I can fully become present and fully arrive in this world, and do what I need to do, what I'm put here on this earth to do. And so I've been working through this hero's journey with him. And for the last 6 months, I've been stuck in the Valley of the Dead Souls, which, for anybody not familiar, is like, it's like almost halfway through the story. The Valley of the Dead Souls is this dark, mysterious place that you can't really see much. It's really frightful, and there's a lot of fear there, because you're approaching the grand ordeal, or like this big battle that you have to do. And for me, that battle included, climbing to like this Mount Olympus type mountain and slaying this dragon, which represented this memory of what I held to be my mom.
This is kind of like your inner visualization.
Yeah, yeah. This is the inner narrative that I'm doing, and he asked me to write it out. He said, write your own hero's journey, and I haven't been able to bring myself to do that. And so instead, um, I've utilized medicine work to engage with that process, and I've done medicine work in the float tanks to try and engage that work, to try and tap into that level of consciousness. And then in particular, like I did this training a couple weekends ago with the Psychedelic Research and Training Institute, and it was a ketamine assisted psychotherapy training, which you've done yourself over the summer. And I did this training to try and, number one, first and foremost, become a better clinician, to be able to provide ketamine assisted psychotherapy more ethically and better to my clients. But also it includes an experiential component where we we take the medicine. We take a high dose intramuscular ketamine session, and then we do a low dose psycholytic oral solution of ketamine. And really using the model of like, we need to experience what our clients are going to experience if we're going to be effective at all, and I truly believe in that. And so those experiences, the low dose actually in particular became extremely helpful for me in my hero's journey with this Jungian therapist. And so we first did the high dose IM session. We were up in the mountains of Boulder a couple weekends ago, and I went in with that intention, like, okay, let's go slay this dragon. Let's do this. And that's not what I was shown. I was shown in my, I had what could be considered a mystical experience during that high dose session, but I was shown more like things that I've seen before, like the medicine showed me how, through metaphor, sort of how the universe is constructed, how individual consciousnesses are constructed, how they interact. This time it used the metaphors of bubbles in my visualization, which was quite pleasant. But then right in the middle of our training, the fire broke out in Boulder, the new wildfire, and it ended up only being like a few miles away from the training center that we were at. We could hear like propane tanks from houses blowing up, and that is
Whoa.
definitely not a good setting for psychedelic experiences, right? You
No.
don't you don't want to be on ketamine when the fire department shows up and says you all need to mandatorily evacuate, and you're disembodied, trying to move around and figure this thing out. So we
Yeah.
decided to leave that location, and we reconvened at the Holiday Inn in North Boulder, where most of us were staying, and we finished out the training there. And we did our psycholytic low dose oral sessions there. And I'd only had one previous low dose ketamine therapy session, and it was more like a low dose group process session where we were taking it at a low dose as a professional group and trying to problem solve with each other, sort of on this higher level of consciousness when we were still able to consciously talk with each other. And it was really interesting. I think that would be a great aspect of the writing that you're exploring as far as group process and psychedelics. This low dose sort of raises the consciousness of everybody in the group so that you can all be super creative and uh, engage ingenuity and things like that in this higher level together. But anyway, during this low dose session, nothing was happening. Nothing was happening for about 30 minutes or so. And then all of a sudden, I got these amazing images, the hero's journey that I was on, picked up where I had left off in the Valley of the Dead Souls. And this image of me as my warrior self, who had recently been intertwined with my inner child and who healed each other, went on this battle journey up this mountaintop, which was on fire in my visualization because that had just happened. So it's on fire. We go up the mountain. We see this dragon who's very elusive and trying to hide behind the mountain, and I'm just like, stay calm, don't let it smell your fear, you got this, staying in this meditative state. And then this dragon comes straight at me in my visualization and attacks me, and like a samurai warrior would, I slashed at it, but it had a totally different feeling than what I anticipated. Like, I thought I'd be like slashing away at this thing in anger and like, fuck you, I'm gonna kill you, get out of me, stop, leave me alone. But instead, the ketamine was holding me in almost like an MDMA type space, where when I slashed at this dragon, I didn't defeat it with anger, but what came out of my sword was pure love and gratitude, and I was just like, oh my God, like, I am so grateful for my mom and everything she did for me. And I love you so much. And I'm never going to let you go. You're always going to be a part of my heart, but you cannot control me anymore. I will not allow these attacks on my consciousness anymore. And then the dragon just dissolved in front of me. And it was the most beautiful, blissful feeling. I feel like right after that, I got the treasure at the end of that ordeal. that you get. And for me, the treasure was just like this flooding feeling. Again, fire coming up in my visualization because the mountain was just on fire. This feeling of like pink and red flames in my heart space, and my heart just could not hold it anymore. And it just burst open through my chest, like these flames I'm seeing like come into the room and totally engross the room and the hotel and the entire state of Colorado with all the wildfires and every human being in the entire world. And so like that's this treasure that I got was I reclaimed that inner fire that had been like been stifled my whole life. And I felt like I individuated and fully felt what my potential is, what my capability is, and what my purpose in this lifetime monomyth hero's journey is, which is I reclaimed this inner fire energy, and now it's my job to bring it back to the world and to share this flame with everyone. And so I had these visualizations of like this fire just pouring out of my chest and these little embers like floating out to the world and landing, like each ember was landing on someone who was suffering, and it was lighting them on fire with passion and love and gratitude. And so like these little embers are just getting spread out throughout the world and lighting everyone on fire with love. And it was freaking phenomenal, dude. And so my CAP training became one of the most healing experiences for me in my life. And I'm so very grateful for the opportunity to do that. It was amazing. That's sort of like how I've been telling stories in my life is through this hero's journey construct.
Yeah, dude, that was epic. Damn, I was so into that, just like in the journey with you, man. Feel really impacted by that experience that you just shared.
The coolest part is like I didn't even have to write anything. I didn't have to write it out in a story. Like I had
No.
like my
Uh-huh.
facilitator was sitting right there next to me, and he was like a scribe. He wrote every single thing I said during the journey.
Oh, so you're
Yeah, and
kind of
so
narrating it a little bit?
yeah. Oh, I was speaking the whole time about it. I was talking to the dragon and talking to myself and narrating it. And so I have like this 8-page handwritten document that is like my big ordeal that now I get to take this
Whoa.
document to my Jungian therapist and have him like analyze it. Pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome. I have several questions.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, man, there's a lot here. Shit. Okay. One is, so there's you had this experience with the ordeal, the climbing the mountain, and the dragon. Um, before this ketamine session, were you already engaging with that image?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
okay.
so actually like a couple months ago I jumped in the float tank here in Fort Collins, and I was in an altered state and was in the float tank, and was I went in with the same intention, like, okay, let's do this, like let's do this ordeal. And what was shown to me was first I was shown like I'm still in the valley of the dead souls, and this beautiful woman came to me in that place, and she ended up being my inner feminine energy.
The anima.
Yep, the anima. Her name was Sophia. um, and I had this conversation with her. I'm like, I'm afraid of this ordeal. Can you show me? Can you be with me? What's going to happen when I go up this mountain? And all she did was like smirk at me and like smile and almost like laugh. And she's like, you already know what's going to happen. You already know. And then immediately after she said that, I was almost like shown this movie reel of like, this is exactly what's going to happen. You're going to go up this mountain, and you're going to be calm in the experience, and you're going to go in and you're going to slay this dragon, and you're going to honor it and show gratitude, and you're going to get this reward at the end. And so I was sort of shown this future projection of what was going to happen. And so when I went into this ketamine experience during the training, yeah, I already had some of those images already in my mind, and sort of this confidence that, like, I already know how this is going to turn out. I know I'm going to win this thing. I just have to go through it. So yeah, I already had those images.
Yeah. And it sounds like the way that you won it was in a way that you hadn't fully anticipated.
Yeah, it came out totally differently. And, I could not, I think my whole life I was trying to kill that dragon with anger and resentment and yeah, just negative
Well,
forces. But
yeah,
it can't kill the dragon that way.
right. Yeah, it reminds me of what you were saying about the table. Like, if this dragon is a part at the table, you can't just banish it or like, give the Dr. Evil button and like send it down into the fire. Like, changing your relationship with it, perhaps, and meeting it with a different energy seems like it was a big part of like dissolving its grip,
Yeah, dissolving its power by
its power.
giving it its due attention and giving it the all it wanted was to be noticed and to be loved. And as soon as I did that, as soon as I said, I see you and I love you and I'm so grateful for you,
Yeah.
it dissolved. The power
Yeah.
went out of it.
Hmm. And they talk about that in internal family systems too, like turning to these different parts and meeting them with love and compassion of the self, and like how all of them really are just trying to protect you in a way. It doesn't feel like that, and like it may not be obvious and it can be hard, but like you can have these dialogues with them and realize that they're here not just to like make your life a living hell, but to do something that got distorted at
Yeah.
some point, or like was needed a long time ago and isn't needed anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, that's powerful stuff, man. That's so cool that you had that experience. Um,
Yeah, I wish I could share. I wish we had time today that I could share all the details with you, but I
yeah,
still I have that narrative, and maybe another time when we're not doing a podcast on a time constraint or anything like that, maybe I'll get more in depth with it. But I knew you would appreciate it just because of the hero's journey aspect of it,
yeah,
and how it does tell a story, and it tells a story, and we all tell a story in our lives. We all tell our own hero's journey, and we can either be the hero or we can be the victim, and I choose to be the hero of my own story. And yeah, I choose to be the victor. I choose to come out on top and be a better person because of it.
yeah, yeah. And you engage the process with respect, and like respect of the different steps. It's not just like speeding your way to victory. It's like, oh, I'm in this valley of the dead souls for a while, and it's kind of sucks to be here, but this is where I am, and like I'm engaging with this place until I'm ready, until I like am able to go to this next place. And that's what I love about the hero's journey. The monomyth is like, yeah, we see it externalized in these stories, and you can study like so many Hollywood movies and just map it out perfectly according to it. But it's like, well, there's a reason that these stories, we love these stories. There's a reason that so many people love Star Wars and The Matrix, because yeah, they follow that pattern, and it's because that pattern exists inside of us. And because by watching this, we are experiencing an internal process that is archetypal and like eternal, is ongoing. And so, I hear you like engaging in that internal structure that's inside all of us, that isn't just, the story of Neo
Mhm.
going into the real world, but like this story of Shane finding like the images within yourself of these same steps, of the same process of going through all these different places, to, overcome the great ordeal, the great trial. Like Neo's doing kung fu with Agent Smith, and
Yep.
you're fighting this dragon on top of Mount Olympus. Like
Mhm.
that's why we can keep telling the stories, because it's endless with the amount of ways that we can, and images that we can engage in it. And I think like having that, engaging in that personal process is just like so, there's so much therapeutic potential there, because like you're engaging in these images, but these images mean something huge to you.
Yeah. Yeah. The symbolism behind them holds so much weight, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I know you've been through the training too. And what an amazing training it is. The
Yeah.
ketamine assisted psychotherapy training that Pradi puts on. And I was hoping to hear about your experience. Because last time we got together was up in the mountains around the campfire, and you had just finished your training, I believe, like the week before. But we didn't get much time to actually sit down and talk about um, how it was for you and what it was like to be in those spaces for you, and how it helped you in
Mhm.
your process.
Yeah. Man, tough act to follow, man.
Yeah,
It was not as epic.
yeah,
It was amazing. Like it was perfect and everything I needed. Um,
yeah, that's exactly for how I if I take the narrative away from it, but that's what I would say about mine. Like it was everything that I needed to get out of it.
yeah. Yeah. There's some like parts of it that are still so fresh that I don't I can't go into like super detail. Um, but basically I had a very um, tough situation, um, relationship situation that um, have been really consuming my mind for a while. Um, just a lot of confusion, just trying to figure out like what's my heart saying, what's my mind saying, like is this the right place for me to be? Should I move on? Where's fear? Where's myself? Just this like confused entanglement of my inner process that um, just found really, really, really hard to navigate, and like find a center in. And it was going on for a while, just going through these cycles, and um, I really came in looking for insight, like for for my heart to show me like how I what I know beneath all the confusion. Um, and that was my intention going in. It was that specific situation. Um, and it was really, there was a lot of like pain alive in it. Like I was really stressed, and I mean when I showed up to the training, the first thing I did was go through the vitals, the medical um, check, and my blood pressure was like high, which isn't normal. And they were saying that there could have been some faultiness with the readers, but like it made sense with the state of mind I was in. I was so stressed and just I don't know. I don't. Maybe I was in some kind of a valley of the lost souls. It was this feeling of being like lost from myself, like um, when I came in, and yeah, even in the high dose session where like for quite a bit of it, I had no idea what was going on or like who I was. Like I just remember this voice coming in, like, I think this is the experience. I think this is that ketamine experience we're here for. Like there was no real orientation, but somehow still like that intention circled around in that space. And like I connected to that whole coex system, web of interconnections. And the answer was right there. It wasn't even like a process. It wasn't like, it was just like, here's your heart. This is what you know. Like, and I felt like those thoughts and ego gripping is kind of like trying to come in, but that ketamine, I think, just gives such an amazing space to allow those to like just float away and like it not be painful. Like it felt so supportive. Those could just like pass. And remember entering a place and I just had this thought because I was still trying to like make meaning in the experience and make sense. And this thought went through and it was um, like you don't need words here, or like words aren't welcome here. And it just like gave me permission to let go of like words.
Mm.
And I wasn't thinking in words anymore. It was just like moving through my body and a really deep, like felt wisdom that was very sensory and alive. And yeah, all the answers were right there. And then I came out and was like elated and like, euphoric for a while, like, wow, I got all these insights. And then, a few hours later, start like questioning it again. Like, okay, but that was, a high dose ketamine experience. Is that really what my heart's telling me? Or, ego started coming in. And um, then the next day was the low dose. And so I just was so grateful for another opportunity. Like, okay, well, I had this experience once. Let's see what it's like at a lower dose. And same thing, same experience. Heart told me the exact same thing. And both times, like um, Chris Pateros, who had led our kind of ceremony around it, she encouraged or at least invited us to like call in allies, like spirit guides. So I thought of just particular friends, and they came into the experience, like even in the dissociated state. It was like just having that clear intention of like, yeah, I'd like this spirit or this person to be a part of it, and like they they entered it, and I felt their wisdom. They shared their wisdom in that state. Um, but yeah, it very much cleared away the confusion and the strife in those states and just presented me with like, here's here's your truth. Like, this, you've known this, things have gotten in the way, but like this is it. And it's blasted. Like it was right, like
Mm.
I've been integrating that for months, the months since, and fighting it at times, struggling with it, but it's all proven valid.
Wow. That heart space is so difficult sometimes for us to work with, especially I think as men, because part of our
Mm.
default mode network programming, unfortunately, is being told since we're really young that the heart space is sort of off limits to us.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and we need to remain in the rational mind and take care of business. So
Totally.
it's been a
And
big
that's
part
what
of
I
me.
was trapped in, was
Yeah.
over processing, like
Yeah.
rationally, mentally. Like
Yep.
there's no answer there. It's just like this cyclical stuckness in this over rumination default mode network thing, the heart space that, like you said, a lot of men aren't like are barred from access from. Yeah, I had all the answers.
Yeah. Yeah. Early on in my recovery from my alcoholism, um, one of my sponsors told me this thing that has stuck with me forever, and it's so true. He said, "No matter how far you travel in the world, no matter what you go and do, if you go to space, if you do all these things, the longest journey you're ever going to take is between your head and your heart." And I was like, wait a minute, that's only like a foot and a half distance at first. That's not a very, But the longer I sat with that, I was like, oh man, he's so right. Like trying to travel from just that cognitive headspace and travel into that heart space to really move through the world more from the heart space, is a really long and difficult and challenging journey for us to make. But in the little glimpses that I've gotten when I have been able to live through that heart space, oh my goodness, like the world just starts to shimmer. Everything around me is just so amazing and so beautiful. I view myself so much more beautifully, when I can travel to that heart space and live through that heart space. I'm nicer to people. I'm nicer to my dogs. Everything just seems like it's all well. It's all okay. And as soon as as soon as I go back up to this space up in my mind, it's like all the chatter and all the things that could be wrong and all the
Mm,
um, all the catastrophizing and everything else that seems to come in and cause that suffering.
mm.
Yeah.
You can start another podcast, Conversations with the Heart.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
It's a few too many though.
yeah, I'm not really not really that versed in the heart space yet, but yeah, maybe someday when I'm there.
Yeah,
Nice, man. Well, thanks for sharing with me and the audience that experience. I mean, I could feel that pain um in your voice when you were talking, and I could also feel the relief from that pain too when you talked about the messaging that you received um, while in that space. So thank you. I mean, it's amazing to be able to feel and see that process and the healing happen to you like right in front of me on this screen, even though we're not in person. I can still connect with you on that way.
totally. Yeah, I felt that when you were sharing your story too. Like, yeah, you almost brought me to tears. Like when you were talking about how the sword changed to from anger to like, compassion and love, and it started to dissolve. It's just,
Mm.
yeah, so powerful what we can experience with this. I mean, specifically ketamine, which is available. It's incredible.
Yeah, available in legal treatment.
Yep.
Well, I'm super stoked for you and your journey through yourself, number one, most importantly, but also in this endeavor that you're undertaking at Naropa to become a psychedelic assisted therapist. I'm so stoked for you to be there doing that work. Um, you are much needed in this field. I hear frequently from others in this field who I've held space for or who I've journeyed with, that I bring a particular strength and grounding and a certain type of energy that's very helpful in those spaces. People have told me like that I embody like mountain type energy, just very grounded and steady. Um, Unwavering, and I feel that from you too, as a person in these psychedelic spaces. And we're few and far between. You
Mm,
won't meet, or I haven't met too many people in doing psychedelic work or psychedelic integration or whatever who embody that much needed grounding energy. Mostly I encounter people who are pretty lofty and pretty
for
light
sure.
and floating around, with their energy. So I'm super happy that you're getting into it. I feel bonded to you on that level, and I hope
Likewise,
that
yeah.
that you and I can go forward and help a lot of people and share what what gifts we were given, as the men that we are.
Yeah. Thanks, Shane. I appreciate that. And um, I'm glad you've gotten that feedback too, because actually, when I was describing a while ago the ayahuasca experience and how that guy came over to help me and how he had that energy, as I was describing that, my mind like paralleled you with him, with your energy and just this grounded strength, that mountain energy. So I feel that from you too, and that energy helped me in that state, and I'm sure that you're already helping a lot of people by embodying that, and will continue to do so. And yeah, man, I'm stoked that we're sharing this journey in all these ways, and that we get to keep learning from each other and helping each other and exploring these dimensions.
Yeah. And we didn't even have enough time to get to talking about flow tanks or talking about your passion for lifting weights, or both of our shared passion for combining psychedelics and exercise and sport and things like that. So um, we'll have to have more conversations in the future about that. But I want to thank you again for coming on the show today. I know that it's always amazing for me to get to know you better and to just talk with you. But I feel like a lot of the things that you shared and a lot of the things that you helped bring out of me today are going to help a lot of people who are going to hear this. So thank you for being a part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for bringing me into it, Shane. And yeah, thanks to anyone listening for going on this journey with us. I really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it.
Awesome. So for all you listeners out there, take care of yourselves. Pay attention to those thoughts that you're feeding yourself. It's part of your diet, and they will solidify into whatever you are attending to. So attend to the good, be nice to each other, be compassionate, and check out the hero's journey. It might be something that you can find useful. So until next time, this has been Conversations with the Mind. See ya. Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.